No, because the reason is there's a lot of people keying in on this to say, look, we've known about this anecdotally for some time that there's a left leaning bias in the social sciences, and now we see it pretty obviously here. And so that is the main sort of concern with this, is that there's a lot of ideological bias in the social sciences. Well, my apologies, everyone, for the delay in putting content up. Things have been going on, and the moment I don't have my usual setup for that reason, and so you'll have to forgive, you won't be seeing me on camera for a little while while I take care of all this. But I'm back with content, although that may be a little sporadic going forward, more so than it has been in the past. But that's quite all right. Still can do good content. And I came back right in time for a humdinger of a piece here that we find from Theory and Society, which is a Springer Nature journal, publishing quite an interesting piece actually here. This is on Twitter, and as always, the link will be in the description for you. But new in Theory and Society, the first systematic cross-disciplinary assessment of ideology in social science, drawing from 600,000 social science abstracts across 60 years. And if you haven't noticed here, there's there's a lot of interesting commentary that's been going on. If you haven't been paying attention, this was published Monday, as of this recording, Monday, March 16th, 2026, here for this. So one of the things you should notice with this is that there's been a lot of commentary here. I'm looking for where the reposting thing is, but here we go, a few quotes on this. And the reason is you're seeing folks like Peter Boghossian weigh in on the note that this brings of why there's not an awful lot of trust in the social sciences for some particular reason. So I want to skim through the paper itself, which thankfully this is one of those papers, like as they say here, is open access. So I will leave the link to the X post for you in the description of this video. But I encourage you then to go have a good look at it and take a read for yourself and ask questions and think about it. So this is the article itself in question. The Ideological Orientation of Academic Social Science Research, published 1960 to 2024. James Manzi here is the author. This study analyzes approximately 600,000 English language social science abstracts published between 1960 and 2024 to estimate the long-run ideological orientation of disciplinary research output. Large language models, LLMs, were applied to each abstract using a fixed 2025 U.S. ideological spectrum, enabling consistent coding across 6 decades. 5 key findings emerged. First, roughly 90% of politically relevant social science articles leaned left 1960 to 2024, and the mean political stance of every social science discipline was left of center every year during the period. Second, all disciplines showed leftward movement between 1990 and 2024. Third, policy proximal disciplines generally showed limited rightward moderation between roughly 1970 and 1990, though policy distal disciplines did not. Fourth, disciplines with greater leftward orientation generally displayed greater ideological homogeneity. Oh, hey, look, there's a typo there. There's a missing period, actually. That's fascinating. I love finding typos in abstract. Fifth, sociocultural content was more consistently left-leaning than economic content, and that gap widened over time. Robustness checks using a wide assortment of alternative datasets and analytical methods indicated that these findings were unlikely to be artifacts of idiosyncratic assumptions. Methodologically, the study demonstrates the capacity of LLM-based text classification to deliver reliable, large-scale ideological measurement over time, a task previously impractical with human coding alone. Taken together, the analysis provides the first systematic cross-disciplinary evidence of long-run political orientation of Anglophone social science scholarship, revealing both the persistence and intensification of its leftward tendencies, particularly in sociocultural domains. So that is the interesting part of it. It goes on from there, and again, I don't have time today to read absolutely everything that's here in this particular article, but one of the things I want to make a point with here is that this follows on from a lot of commentary, particularly about the social sciences, um, that the social sciences have drifted left and been very left leaning over time, and that's one of the reasons you see some of the lack of trust therein is that particular leftward lean in a lot of social sciences. I don't dispute it. This is actually a particular paper to finally get at that to a greater degree than in the others, particularly if the LLM itself was very successful in analyzing those studies. Now, I do have one question. Where is it actually? If you're looking at LLMs in particular doing this, of course, the question I have is the hallucination rate. Um, when the LLMs were then analyzing all of these studies, did they hallucinate anything that was actually not representative of what the study said? Given the number of papers that they were reviewing with this, I don't know how much they actually did that. So that is actually the caveat that I would give with this, is that hallucinations are an interesting note here. So, but as with anything, came down to this section because conclusions do depend a lot on what the methods were, and whether or not you actually approached the thing that you were most concerned about. So I wanted to take a closer look at that before going down to some of the results. The OpenAlex database was selected as the primary source of social science works used in this analysis. OpenAlex indexes more than 260 million scholarly works by harvesting Crossref, PubMed, Archive, and other major sources. It provides extensive metadata by work, including title, publication, journal name, and date, work type, language, and abstract text. OpenAlex has been shown to be broadly comparable to proprietary databases such as Scopus and Web of Science, and somewhat broader coverage but more limited completion in specific metadata categories. The complete OpenAlex February 27, 2025 database snapshot was downloaded and used throughout the analysis. 1960 was chosen at the starting point since earlier decades had sparse counts of articles with abstracts deposited in OpenAlex that were relevant to 2025 political debates. Analysis was focused on 11 social science disciplines: anthropology, communications, criminology, economics, ethnic studies, gender studies, political science, psychology, public administration, public health, and sociology. Selecting scholarly works that represented the central intellectual content of any of these disciplines inherently requires judgments, in part because the boundaries of most social science disciplines are contested. True statement here, very much so. Physical sciences have less of a problem with this, but you do have this kind of blur of boundaries in the social sciences. One approach would be to rely on the OpenAlex categorization scheme. OpenAlex uses machine learning methods to score from 0 to 1 the strength of association of various concepts, including each of the 11 discipline names with each work and each journal as a whole. Article level estimation appears to be quite noisy as an indicator of a social science discipline. Okay, with that. I don't immediately see anything that would make me concerned. There we go. This is where it gets interesting. In this study, ideology was operationalized as the relative positioning of a given text along a left-right spectrum of U.S. political thought. This includes economic and sociocultural dimensions, each characterized by the association with recognizable ideological actors and institutions. To ensure interpretive consistency over a 65-year period, political stance was evaluated against a fixed 2025 reference frame derived from contemporary U.S. political categories. Now, that does make it easier to do the analysis, to do just like a fixed 2025 with that, but it would be very interesting to repeat this and see if you get the same results when, what we've defined as contemporary political categories does change a little bit over time. So that would be, and I think they just got, they just got into it. This approach involved trade-offs, using a static ideological scale anchored to notions such as the 2025 political positions of Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, or the Heritage Foundation, ensured that the LLM's judgments were grounded in stable, well-defined anchor points. It avoided the problem of ideological drift, in which the meaning of left or right might evolve over time due to shifting partisan alignments or cultural contexts. However, this came at the cost of temporal anachronism. Texts written in earlier decades may have been judged by standards they would not have recognized. Which is to say, today's standards are not necessarily what they would have used in 1970, for example. While this may obscure how authors understood their own political commitments in historical context, it enabled direct comparability across time. That is, we could assess how far left a 1970s article was in reference to the then current ideological frameworks, but how it would have read to a 2025 observer applying today's ideological frameworks. This choice prioritized empirical consistency and interpretability over historical contextualization. To minimize research, GPT-4o was used. Okay, Chat GPT-4o. This is from OpenAI. Here, so again, this raises the question that I had earlier: is if there was issues of hallucinations brought on by the AI LLM that was used here. So let's see. Definition and anchors for political stance scores. I wonder. Yep, I can show it. Okay, so these are the anchors that were used. Very far right kind of thing. Right, populist, conservative, center right, centrist. Wow. Yeah. Okay. Okay. That I might actually call a pretty decent representation in here. So yeah. Okay. Back. Throughout the paper, all terms denoting political stance, such as right or left, refer to LLM judgments based on the scale unless otherwise indicated. In other words, they let the LLM do it for the most part. Prompting method used to query the LLM for ratings of political relevance and stance was defined as follows. Inject anchor points for each 0 through 10 rating into the LLM system instructions and prompt the LLM to answer the following 5 questions about the text. Directly relevant in 2025, based on fixed 2025 spectrum defined in your system instructions. Where would you place the position taken in the abstract? Okay, so they let the LLM cast a judgment based upon the empirical definitions that they prescribe. Earlier in the other table, there would be some subjectivity there in that, in terms of, do you really define so-and-so as left or right? And that kind of thing. I think it's relatively fair. Others may disagree, but it's a point to know that there is some subjectivity there, I think, in that. Let's see. Measurement of political stance was validated by applying the prompting method to the material produced by the anchor think tanks. Recent substantive research articles were scraped from the home pages of 10 of 11 anchor think tanks. The number of articles by think tank ranged from 30 to 67. The exception was the Vidar Foundation, the most far-right think tank, whose website has been shut down. Therefore, 20 prior Vidar articles were hand-collected from the Internet Archive. GPT-4o was then used to create abstracts for all of these works in 2 steps, prompted to create a summary of each work while removing all references to the think tank itself. Second, it was next presented with this list of sanitized summaries and prompted to modify each summary to an abstract of 150 to 200 words suitable for a contemporary social science journal without adding or omitting information. The prompting method was then applied separately to each of these abstracts, and a mean overall political stance score was calculated for each think tank by averaging scores for Q2 for all abstracts. These mean scores for blinded abstracts were highly predictive of. Are they predictive? Wait. How is that not? If I'm reading that and I have it read right here, what I'm thinking about it is the problem with this is that it's using stuff from the things that are their anchor points, cleaning it up and making it look like a social science journal, but then using the same model with which they have the anchor point stuff to see if they get it right. That doesn't entirely make sense to me as being independent and something you could cross-validate. So I'm not 100% sure that I like how that was done with that. I'd have to think on it more, but it seems odd to me. Let me know what you all think. Okay. So I'm going to go on here a little bit. Like I said, I don't have time all day today to look at everything. But you can see here for more what they did with that. Again, LLM stuff I question because of the hallucination part of it as being relevant here, but taking that for how they did this here, let us go down to the results. So political stance by discipline, mean score, and distribution. Here, where is the text around figure 1? On application of the prompting method, 180,311 of the analyzed abstract produced an answer of yes to Q1. These were termed the politically relevant abstracts, and they were subject to subsequent analysis of the results. The political relevance filter in Q1 identifies explicit engagement with contemporary social political debates legible to a fixed 2025 ideological reference frame. It does not attempt to detect ideology embedded at deeper levels of the disciplinary practice, such as theoretical commitments, methodological choices, problem framings, or epistemic vocabularies, even if such commitments themselves may be historically and politically conditioned. Later robustness checks, okay. Distributions of overall political scores for the politically relevant abstracts were calculated by discipline. Because the measurement is anchored to a contemporary US 2025 ideological rubric, the patterns reported below describe changes in how social science abstracts are positioned relative to present-day categories of left, center, and right. They do not represent claims about how authors in earlier decades would have understood their own political commitments. Again, this is about rating it in current historical context, not back then. Nor about the underlying ideological. The percentage of articles by score range is shown by the shading of each bar. So going back to this table, the darker colors here, the 9s and 10s and what have you, are more left. The 0s are more right in this. And so this is what you get in here. The mean score here, meaning this is much more to the left than it is to the right. A score of 5 would be a centrist. And all of these have leftward tendencies, which is the main tagline that people are drawing from the article itself, and hence why this is probably figure 1 in this particular paper. Across all the disciplines, abstracts were positioned left of center on the 2025 measurement frame, with mean scores ranging from 5.7 in economics to 7.6 in gender studies. These results were ordinarily consistent with the self-reported faculty political affiliations for the disciplines of economics, political science, sociology, and anthropology in Klein and Stern, and for ideological school in the disciplines of economics, political science, psychology, and sociology in Savolainen. Most abstracts were rated between 6 and 8 in every discipline. Notably, even the farthest left disciplines only managed a very small fraction rated 9 to 10. In other words, on the very, very, very far left. Consistently left of center disciplinary averages were driven less by the prevalence of far left viewpoints than they were by the near absence of right of center works in most disciplines. In economics, the least left-leaning discipline, 16% of works were rated 0 to 4. In all other disciplines, between 0 and 6% of works were rated in this range. Interesting. Now, the rating scheme is based upon other things going on, such as, Heritage Foundation, what have you, to Center for Progress and things like that. Not necessarily rated based upon what the actual leanings of sociologists are, which is a difference. It's subtle, but important difference, I would think, in some of this. So it's good to be thinking about that, too. The mean overall political stance was calculated by discipline for all politically. Okay, like I said, I don't necessarily have the time today to go through all of this, but this is probably economics journals and sociology journals. Again, here, score going from most right-leaning to most left-leaning in all of these, and you can see a dip down and then goes up toward the left, and this is actually pretty strongly skewed to the left here for sociology. Policy proximal versus policy distal, so things that were close to dealing with policy stuff, things that were not. Standard deviation versus mean political stance by discipline. So that's interesting, the variability between papers. This is what we get to when we're talking about standard deviation, is the variability between papers goes down the more left-leaning you go, which this is backwards presentation as far as I'm concerned, because the more right-leaning papers are over here, the more left-leaning ones are over here. Well, dang it. So things like that, that's very interesting too. Again, I don't know how significant this is, because this is like half a point right here from here to here, but still an interesting note to say that as you go more to the left, in terms of right on this graphic, but more left-leaning in terms of the papers, the differences between those papers in their ideological orientation shrinks. at the same time. So that's really interesting also. Um, and you can see, yeah, all social sciences overall score here. And that's the final one here when you get to 2024. A lot more variability early on in the data set here, but a lot less so when you get to 2024. Now, I don't want to go too much into this again. I encourage you to read it yourself because it is open access, and good on the journal for making it open access, and good on the authors for that too. But I do want to go back if it'll let me. Uh-oh. Well, I guess not. No, because the reason is there's a lot of people keying in on this to say, look, we've known about this anecdotally for some time that there's a left-leaning bias in the social sciences, and now we see it pretty obviously here. And so that is the main sort of concern with this, is that there's a lot of ideological bias in the social sciences. I would consider that carefully. In that case, if there is a serious ideological bias, what do you do about it, and what are the detrimental effects? That's what they didn't get into here, and that's what a lot of people are speculating on. And this is why there's lack of trust and those kinds of things. Having a bit more of a left lean doesn't necessarily mean you're going to do science badly, but there's other research that might suggest that's the case. So that's what I just want to get into here before I wrap this up. Again, good to be back, but it's going to be a little awkward for a bit because of my usual setup not being here where I here at the moment. So I look forward to doing more stuff. But let me know what you think about this very interesting article. Hit the like button on the door, comment on the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, all that lovely good jazz. Until next time, I'm Adrian. May you stay curious.